All right, next question says this. How do we obey Romans 13 when our government is currently a free-for-all and there seems to be no rule of law anymore, or it's just the opinionated interpretation of the office and power? So obviously Romans 13 is submission to government authorities.
Uh-huh.
This question, the way I'm reading it, is just because there's... It's not like back in the day where there was a law and this is what it said. It's like, I mean, whether you're talking about the president, the press, you know, the back and forth Democrat Republican thing, the sexual discrimination thing that's going on, the Russian investigation that's going on, and then just the local state laws. You know, Washington State. I mean, all the junk we've dealt with in the last 5 years. It just seems to be a smorgasbord of stuff. But then, as a Christian, we're supposed to submit to that. How does that all work? We have a constitution. They're following it on some level and then not on others, and a lot of times it can be an interpretation of the like this person says, the office and power. So what do we do as we sit back and live our lives underneath all this?
One thing you might want to do is turn the news off. It's like
no, that's a great point.
I'll turn the news off every once in a while and not pay attention for a couple of weeks, and really my life doesn't change all that much, you know. And so I want to keep those things in perspective, because if you watch the news every night, you're going to go crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying don't do that, because I watch the news. But in any case, keep it in perspective. The passage in Romans 13 says this: "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same. For he's God's minister to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he's God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, custom to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." And then he says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law." And so we're supposed to be subject to governing authorities. And we've talked about this before. In the United States, we don't have a king. We don't have somebody who has absolute power. What we have is a constitution. And so I am bound to the Constitution of the United States. I'm not bound to a certain man, and I'm not bound to a certain governmental authority in the sense of, this guy's in power, and whether he obeys the Constitution or not, we have to follow him. That is not the case. Every single one of us, according to our Constitution, is bound by law. The problem has come in the United States in that what we have is groups of people, and I'm talking about government, that is ignoring the Constitution. So when you ignore the Constitution, what happens is you start getting into situations where people are just doing what they want to do. And so some of that has had to do with, for example, Congress has taken some of its constitutional powers and given it over to the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is all those people who are just hanging out, government employees who are there from one administration to the next administration, and they basically run things. And so if Congress is given, for example, oversight of something over to a bureaucracy, well, the bureaucracy is unelected, and they're going to end up doing what they want to do depending on who's in there. And so some of the problems that we have come from that kind of stuff. When you get to the point in a government, and this is my opinion on this stuff, you guys, but you get to a point in a government where you have two competing parties, which is what we have, and they have no commonality. The part of the problem that we have in the United States is that we have people who have no common ground on morality. They have no common ground on, we have no common ground on what a marriage is. We have no common ground on what a family is. We have no common ground on what right is. We have no common ground on what wrong is. And it's that kind of thing. When you have that kind of thing going on, where two groups are totally opposite in those areas, you're going to have a hard time in governing a country, because you have a situation where you're voting these people into power, and they're supposed to be working together. Well, you can't work together if you don't have any common ground. Yeah. And that's a lot of what's happening right now. The other thing that I might point out with this whole mess that we've got is we have two groups of people, and this isn't confined to party. We have two groups of people. We have one group of people who wants to govern the country by the Constitution, and another group of people who wants to minimize the constitutional impact on government and basically wants to do what they want to do. And they want to do it by by democratic means. Like instead of obeying the Constitution in an area, we're going to do it by a poll. And so if most of the people want to do this stuff, then to the devil with the Constitution, let's just do it. And again, when you get yourself in a situation like that, what you have is an actual democracy. We don't have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic. And in our system of government, what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to elect smart people to make good decisions. And that's really a problem. Mm-hmm. If you don't elect smart people to make good decisions and trust the decisions that they're making and trust that they're going to go along with what the Constitution has to say, you're going to have issues. And that's why elections take place. As soon as you have a country ruled by the mob, basically by public opinion, then you're going to start having some problems. And that's frankly one of the things that's happened with our country over time. If 51% of the people want to get free money from the government, you got 49% of the people supporting 51% of the people. Mm-hmm. And democracy falls apart. In fact, that's a famous quote. As soon as a populace realizes they can vote themselves largesse, they can vote themselves money, free money from the treasury, a democracy falls apart. And it's always been the case, and that's part of what we got going on right now. We have a national debt that's spiraling out of control because what people are doing is taking tax money and just passing it out, and you can't sustain that. So ultimately, when I look at what the Bible has to say about submitting, I don't submit to the Congress of the United States in the sense that they are the ruling authority. I submit to the Constitution. And if a man is acting in an office in a constitutional manner, then yeah, I'm supposed to be submitting to that guy. Same thing with the presidency. Same thing with the Supreme Court. And we have some ways to get people out, and the way that you get people out is by voting them out. Not in the case of the Supreme Court, but in the case of the president and in the case of the Congress. And so we have elections. We have ways that we do elections, and when elections are performed, then we are to, Obama famously said, elections have consequences, and so you get the leaders that you deserve, basically. And so I did not like a lot of the stuff that President Obama did. Actually, I liked very little of what President Obama did. One of the things about him, though, is that he did everything he said he was going to do. Everything he did, he said he was going to do, and people voted him into office. And, there are people who don't like what President Trump is doing. And what he's doing is everything he said he was going to do, and he got voted into office. And so if you have one group of people who wants to cause a riot because the guy that they didn't vote for got put into office, then what you're going to have is anarchy, and the United States is going to go down the tubes. And so you don't get to do that. We're a nation of laws, And so whether or not I like Mr. Trump, Mr. Trump's the president, and if he's doing things legally, then that's the way that it goes. And if I don't like Mr. Obama, well, he's the president. If he's doing things legally, then that's the way that it goes. And vote for better people, basically, next time. So,
as we step into this gray area, it's kind of, well, I mean, this is kind of how it happened in the founding of our country, but where you have issues like you mentioned that a democracy is the rule of the mob, when the issue we have as a constitutional republic is there are certain God-given rights, that it doesn't matter how many, if there's 80% of the people that votes that way, they still can't take away because the rights aren't from them, it's from God.
Right.
Whether you're talking about life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom, speech, all that stuff. So when we live in a time where we're supposed to be having those God-given rights, and yet they're trying to take it away, and we can be labeled as, law breakers or something like that. It ends up being this gray area, and this is how basically our country got started with the Declaration of Independence, because a lot of this stuff, I would say even more egregiously now than it was back then, interestingly enough, if you take the time to study that out. But sometimes it can be difficult because as Christians, we want to follow the word and submit, but we're in this gray area where, like simple issues like what bathroom to use, when they're telling me that some guy can go in the bathroom with my little girl, well, now I'm in this gray area where I don't really care what they say.
Yeah.
And
well, that's not so much a gray area.
Well, I mean, if you're in San Francisco.
Yeah, no, what I'm talking about is that's not going to happen. As a Christian, when you're talking about biblical submission, and we should all know this, biblical submission ends where it violates God's word.
Right.
And so when a government tells you, if a government told me that, well, like this whole thing, that a guy can walk into the bathroom with my little girl, I don't care what they say. If I'm standing out, any place that I ever took my little girl to the bathroom, I would stand outside. My girl was small, before all of this stuff took place, and so it hasn't been an issue because she's grown up. But if I was dealing with this right now, I took my little girl to a public bathroom, I would have her go in, I would have her look around and see if anybody was in there, if any guy was in there, and if there was a guy in there, she'd need to come out, and I would wait until he was gone. If my little girl goes in there and a guy wants to walk in on her, I'd stand at the front door of the bathroom and tell him no, and he can have all the fit that he wants to. You're not going to go into the bathroom with my kid, you wacko, and so that is not, that's not even close to being a gray area for me.
Right.
And so if the cops want to come and take me away, okay. Right. The guy's still not going in the bathroom with my little girl, and I don't care what they say. So that's just where that stuff ends. And so there are some things that government comes up with, and it's like it's one of those things. Well, that's a stupid decision, and that's a dumb thing to do, and that kind of stuff. And I'm dealing. You're dealing with a dummy in office, and so you get the dummy out of office hopefully next time. But when it becomes a situation where it's going to actually impact my family in ungodly ways and that kind of thing, then it's time to say no. And so I would say no to that. So, we could go down a list. Right. Yeah.
And maybe, honestly, that's what I did in the beginning. You have to know your Bible, and then obviously there's the God-given rights versus, the other things.
Yeah. That's a good point that you made there too. The reason that our country has worked so well is because, for example, in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, that's called the Bill of Rights, and it was based on the fact that those rights were something that came from God. They weren't granted by government. And that's the difference between our constitutional republic and most of the other governments on the planet. You go to China, the Chinese people get to do certain things, not because they have a right to it, but because the government said so.
Right.
And the only rights that they have are things that the government allows. Our Constitution is based on the fact that we have rights that are inherent. They're inalienable, is how the Declaration of Independence put it. They're there whether the government says they're there or not, and they're granted by God. And so, again, when you're looking now, we're looking at a group of people who are in our country who don't believe in God, and so where do their rights come from? They don't come from God. They're at that point you got a philosophy where the only rights that they have are things that are granted by the mob, and so you have a whole group of people who's agreed that it's okay to do certain things. And so now I have the right to it because the mob agreed to it. And the problem with that is obvious. What if the mob decides that a Jew doesn't have a right to live? That's what happened in Germany. And what if a mob decides that a group of people should be outlawed? And that's what you have with the Romani, the Gypsies. And so there are countries that have persecuted the Gypsies because of that kind of thing. And so you start going with that kind of thing, with that kind of attitude, and kings who have a divine right to rule, and many systems of government are exactly the same thing as a monarchy, in the sense that they've just decided that they have a right to rule. They know better than anybody else, and what they say is going to become law, and that's all there is to it. And you can do that with one man, or you can do that with a party who decides that just based on fiat, this is how life should go, and everybody should bow to it. Well, no, we have inalienable rights, and as soon as you start chipping away at those things, you're going to have a problem. So in the First Amendment, we have the right to free speech. That means free speech, and so if an opinion is not or is not something that I agree with, I may not agree with it, and it may make me mad, but I don't have the right to shut somebody down because they have the opinion. In fact, a lot of the opinions are going around today. The reason that they're here is because people took the First Amendment seriously, and they allowed them the right to say the ridiculous things that they say, including certain words are hate speech, and everything should be politically correct. Those are ridiculous things to say, and yet people who respect the First Amendment allow people to say that kind of stuff. And so now we have people who are politically correct who are trying to take away the First Amendment rights of people who allow them to be able to say the things that they're saying. Yeah. And that's nothing but tyranny. And so whether an opinion is popular or not, you don't want to come down and start saying that people can't say certain things. That's just ridiculous. So
what's cool about that too is that I have friends who they're not Christians. So when they look at that, they don't look when a God-given right. They're not Christians, but they still believe in that because it says "and of nature's God," and so they understand that the philosophy, whether you're a Christian or not, it's in the law of nature. And so a lot of that stuff, you don't even have to be a believer for it to apply to you on a fundamental level.
Yeah. But one of the problems has been that over the years, believers are the ones who, because of specifically the New Testament and the fact that God gives people free will and they have the right to choose and that kind of thing. Believers have been some of the staunchest supporters of, for example, the First Amendment. And as soon as you take away the whole idea that that there's a greater judge, and that he has placed in our world the whole basic rights, that he treats people in a certain way, and that these people have the right to live in this kind of way because it's been ordained by God. As soon as you take God away, then you start having some problems, because even if you're dealing with nature, well, nature is all about survival of the fittest. Yeah. And so if I can beat the snot out of you to keep you from talking, well,
so be it.
Yeah, so be it. That's tough on you because you should have worked out more. Yeah. Or whatever. And so that, the whole idea that God is is something that's basic to the United States Constitution, and as soon as you start taking God out, you start getting dictators. And that's what we've got. We've got tyrants, we've got dictators, we've got people who don't care about the rights of other people. They don't think that people are made in God's image, and so they act accordingly. And if you have power, you want to get more power, and all of that stuff goes along with it. And so it's a slippery slope. It always is. Our country is when you look at countries down through the ages, empires down through the ages, it always goes this direction, and we're going the same way as all the empires that have come before us. So
now, and this is getting anecdotal, but where do you think the next step is? Obviously, we have an election that's going to come up that's going to be another pivotal point, and I know the last few have been that way, but it seems like there's so much tension, there's so much passion, that the next guy that gets in there is just going to take it a step further, whatever direction that's going to be. It seems like it's going to be a pivotal point, because now we have, like it talks in there about paying taxes. We just had a tax reform that it looks like it's going to get passed, but it's I looked at it, and it's a Trump tax reform, but it's not really for the rich. A lot of his rich buddies they don't like it, and yet everyone complains about it. Democrat says that it's a tax cut for the rich, and so my point is that even if they're doing something that the other side agree with, and they attack them, and they go after them, and so it seems like the next person that comes in, there's going to be a flood of attack, because it's like, oh, you did this, so we're going to try and come this, and it's just going to bounce the ball further along to this free for all that we're going. So what do you see the next step of America happening? Do you think we're just going to slowly erode until we become Rome and just fall apart on the inside?
Absolutely. That's what I think is going to happen.
That's what you think?
I don't see any way of stopping this, because we have a whole culture that doesn't care about integrity, obviously.
Yeah.
Pretty much on any level.
Yeah.
They don't care about integrity. They don't care about honor. We have a lot of guys in government, a number of people who are there for good reasons. They want to serve their country, and I know some people who are statesmen. They really do want to serve their country, and so that's a cool thing. But we don't have enough of them.
Yeah.
And so when all of politics is nothing but agenda driven, and the discourse becomes as coarse as it is, and this has happened over years. I've watched the discourse in Congress and in the Senate specifically. It's gotten worse and worse over the years, and most of that has come from one party. And sorry if I'm offending you, but it's the truth. Most of it is coming from one party, and so we have one party who's coarsening the discourse, and then we have another party who's has been trying to keep it normal on some kind of level, but they don't stand up to nonsense. And then the other party begins getting more coarse in their discourse, and it just goes downhill. And I don't see a way to turn it around, because you don't have anybody. Most of the people who are in political power are interested in political power. They're not interested in the country. And so if you don't have that, then things are going to fall apart. And this is one of those things that I've been watching, and I think it's a reason that the United States is not going to is not mentioned in Scripture, and I think it's something that's going to get us into a position where we see what happens in the Bible taking place without the United States intervention. And so it's got to go there. The United States doesn't intervene, and so this is as good a scenario as any for us to get into that position. And what I mean by that is, when you go through and look at Bible prophecy about the end times, the United States is noticeable by its absence. And so we have to get to a place where our country is absent from the rest of the world, or at least from major world politics. And I think this is as good as a scenario as any to get us there, which is scary, because I'm a patriot. I love my country. I came from a military family, and I don't like what I'm seeing. And so
it's a shame.
Yeah.
Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.